Hello, Crossroads Witches and other interesting magical beings. I am so excited to be back again, being able to shoot a video with another practitioner, someone else from our community, so that we can sit and chit chat. For all of you folks out there, Jasmyne Ambrosia, and I'll make sure that I've edited it down there so y'all can make sure you find her channel. I have sort of been secretly fangirling on her for about a year now, I think.
A year.
Yeah, actually, I watched a video of yours about a year ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, you are such a bright, sparkly, dark light.
Thanks.
And I just loved it. And I just really enjoyed it. What impressed me, what I respect so much about you is you speak your authentic voice.
Thank you.
And there are times when you really are vulnerable. You talk about some of the stuff going on in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And for content creators, I'm like, wow, that's big. I know for me, just getting used to being on camera and talking about my things in my own life, I still have areas I'm very, very private about. I'm learning, and I learn from folks like you, Jasmine. So I want to give you a couple of seconds, minutes, however long you need to sort of introduce yourself.
So I am literally the worst at this. Every time someone is ever like, okay, what's your name? And like, who are you? Or tell us a fun fact. Like, I suddenly kind of forget who I am in a way. Like, I'm like, what? What do I do? So yeah, my name is Jasmine Ambrosia. You can find me under most social media tags underneath that name, except for TikTok. On TikTok, I'm 3 obsidian eyes. And TikTok is more for like shit posting. So don't expect serious content out of me on TikTok. Um, that's just kind of where we go to like, have fun and be silly. My YouTube channel is primarily an occult esoteric based channel where I just kind of like vlog about what's going on in my practice and in my community and what I'm experiencing at the moment. I've been on YouTube for most of my 20s. So I've been on YouTube for a little while. And yeah, I work at a metaphysical store here in my city. We do classes. I work at a brick and mortar. I run the Solar Court Coven, which is a neo tradition here in my area. And yeah, I mean, I do hair, I read cards, I take care of my grandmother. I'm her primary caretaker and power of attorney. So yeah, I don't know what else.
And this is what we're going to be talking about out there, which is we're going to be talking about a lot of times the labels, like you just said. And it seems like, what are you? What do you do? And you're just like, I do a lot of things. I'm not just one thing. And I know sometimes for me personally, just to describe, I'll be like, I'm a dark witch.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, it does describe me, but in a lot of ways, it's a disservice to when we talk about the dark and the folks like us who are labeled that way when in reality, we're not. It's that rethinking what is baneful, what is a dark, what is evil, and how in our community we categorize and label things.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you deal with it other than, like you were saying, you're just standing there like, I do lots of stuff.
Yeah.
You're
like, I don't know. I think the first place to really start with, like, where I would start with the topic is like, I think we should define like what exactly it is when we say dark. Because I think that the word dark itself, dark or black, it seems like in the craft is kind of like such like a buzzword or like a trigger word. Like you hear the word black magic and like people here in the West, especially, I feel like will have associations kind of go off whether they're in the witchy community or outside of the witchy community, even through, pop culture and media. Like you watch some of these like occult themed horror movies, and there's always some witch doing black magic, right? And that's like how the item or the doll or whatever gets possessed or haunted. So I think the best way to dismantle the dichotomy that's misinformed, in my opinion, between white and black, good and evil, light and dark, is to define what exactly it is when we're saying these things.
Absolutely. Because like I said earlier, a lot of times just by default, so that I don't have to use a lot of words, I'll be like, I'm a dark witch. But what am I actually saying? Because I seek balance, I seek the light, I seek compassion, understanding, kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And even when somebody, we talk that dark, that light, as opposed to good, bad, with realizing it's not good or bad, it just is.
I definitely view magic in that way, that like think of a vehicle, for example. Like I can get in my car, come pick you up and take you to a doctor's appointment. I can deliver your groceries. I can, drive you around. We can go on a road trip. We can have a lot of fun. I can also run you over. Like it's a car at the end of the day. Like what I choose to do with my vehicle is that's it. And I think magic is kind of similar. I think you can use magic in ways that are beneficial. But I think that also kind of takes us to this next aspect of this conversation is when we're talking baneful magic, because I think that the standard is most people associate black or dark with automatically baneful, offensive, or evil, which I do think that there is like a racial dichotomy at play there to a degree, that everything that's white is automatically good, everything that's black is automatically evil. I think that there's some
I want to add
there
to that little context that you talk about with that it is definitely racial, because when we look at references to Africa, the references are, it's the dark continent. All right. They use the word dark in that downing way. They, less than, somehow primitive, unenlightened. And that Africa, this entire continent, is the dark continent. And especially like for somebody like me, I'm a slightly older witch than you. For our history books were atrocious.
Right.
With these descriptors.
Well, I think too, to play into like, for me, and I think for my worldview of witchcraft, and this is also a hot topic because there's going to be witches who don't agree with me here, but to me, my witchcraft and witchcraft in general is inherently political. There's no way of separating that for me. Right. And like my favorite piece of classical occult sort of literature that would kind of back this up is I've always enjoyed Charles Leland's Gospel of Aradia. And I feel like Aradia is a good example of really being a witch for the people and sticking up for the marginalized, the disenfranchised. And that's what Aradia did. That's what I strive to do as a witch, is it's about liberation. So when we're even looking at Malefica, which is the word that I choose to use for what maybe some people would associate as black magic, Malefica is even based on perception, because what is like normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. Like when we're looking
Absolutely.
when we're looking at greedy landlords trying to up the prices of rent exponentially, and people are struggling to have housing, are struggling to keep food on their table, are trying to take care of their babies, they're going to do anything necessary to provide for them and theirs. And so baneful is really, it's, in whose perspective is something evil or baneful? Because
I use the example of a cat. We love kitty cats, but ask a bird what it thinks of a kitty cat.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a matter of perspective. As far as the birds are concerned, that is one evil walking creature.
Or even just harm in general. Like that's something that I've personally always struggled with like the do no harm camp of thought. is because what exactly is harm and where do we exactly draw the line on like harm? Because what one person might consider to be harmful, another person might not necessarily have that same distinction. So I think when we use words like black magic, we're not only doing a disservice to ourselves and like marginalized communities, but we're also doing a disservice to magic as a whole, in my opinion. And it's an ignorant, narrow-minded, short-sighted way of talking.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And that's where when folks talk about the do no harm that we find within contemporary paganism, is understanding that that is a snippet that does not take the context around it. They took out, and Crowley, Aleister Crowley, was the beginning of the formation of this with his book of law, do what thou will, the whole of the law. And then Gardner,
love under will.
Yeah. And then Gardner sort of, I don't want to say dumbed down, but he obviously simplified the concept.
Right.
And looked upon it very idealistic, because when this was first written down was at a time where he was still formulating what is Wicca. And the do no harm part was a way, because at the same time that he was writing this paperwork in England was at the exact time as the Satanic Panic. So he really needed to differentiate it. Wicca was not satanic.
Well, and I want to say, like, that takes us into what we were talking about the declawing the witch.
Right. And it was, he, like we said, I think you said it best when you said you take the fangs and the claws out of the witch. Was this the beginning of commercialization, whitewashing, palatable? In my private moments, I will talk about, farts, glitter, and bows to rainbows.
Yeah.
This look at the world, like we were talking, what is baneful, to bring us back on subject. I want to go into the world of the herbs, where the lupine flower is beneficial in the spring, deadly in fall. But a lot of times you find it on the baneful list. It's not baneful, except don't eat it in the fall. And even then it's not a baneful herb. It just has a level of toxicity. It's not evil. It's not dark. But how contemporary pagan has really come in and made the good list bad list. And how do we move forward, understanding that the world actually is about balance? Good people do bad things, bad people do good things. That's the reality. And when you try to simplify it, dumb it down to these lists, you lose the complexity of the nature, the spirit of it. All right. I work within necromancy. I work within demonology. I do not work within high magic. I work low magic. I'm all about enticing lesser deities into my space, developing relationships with them, and working with them. I do not consider that to be a bad thing. And I know you as well work within the Luciferian.
Yeah, there's definitely undercurrents of Luciferianism that I feel through like the personification of the witch's devil. Like I personally have an association with like Lucifer as in the devil, but Lucifer also as in like the light bringer, Lord of Light, kind of almost an Apollo-esque figure for me.
More like a witch father figure.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that I am Luciferian as like a signifier. I would say that like I, have undercurrents of that in my own personal practice. And I perceive the witch father can take on that image if the witch father so chooses to. And I would say it's kind of maybe like how some Christians would be like, I'm not a Christian, but I have a personal relationship with Jesus. Like, I'm not a Luciferian, but I do have a personal relationship with Lucifer. So,
I understand because
yeah,
I feel like, I'm not a devotee of Hecate, but I have a relationship with her.
yeah, yeah.
And
So,
you don't have to like fully commit yourself.
yeah, yeah.
And
And
it will,
also, I think if there's anything being on the internet, almost the entirety of my 20s has taught me is that we grow and we change and we evolve. And just because we're content creators and we're here on a camera doesn't mean that we stop growing and evolving. So this is also being recorded, what, October 17th, 2022. It'll be interesting if we watch this same day next year and just even see if we still have the same opinions, because I think as witches, we need to remain adaptable. I think that's a huge part of the craft is being adaptable to your surroundings and growing with the magic. And so this is our opinions now for those of you watching. This is our opinion right now. Things can change. We could be very different witches this time next year, I feel.
I hope we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
I look back at my opinions and ideas in my 20s, and they are very different as I'm, getting ready. I'm 58. So in February, I'll be 59. I'm knocking on 60, and I see uh I I do have some things of almost 180-degree turnabout.
Mm-hmm.
Where in your 20s, I think, I personally, I was like, oh, I'll never do that. Oh, this is how it is. And then it was like the universe spent its 30s going, nuh-uh. And I've changed, evolved. I think I would say my most growth probably actually occurred as I was moving into crony.
Well, and I feel like for people watching too, I know that there are people who have very like long associations with this idea that, white magic equals good magic, black magic equals bad magic, or light, dark, whatever. And I just personally encourage people to just think more critically about the words that they're using. I'm not going to sit up here
But
necessarily and tell which is what words they have to use, but I think that it's good practice in general to be like, why am I really referring to that as this, and what do I really actually mean? Because if we really actually mean malefica, evil intentions, like let's say that actually, because I think that will help the discourse and the dialogue, because I also personally practice maledictions and malefica in my practice. That is a part of my practice. I think a lot of witches include it more than they lead on. Like, I have spoken with many witches who, like, on camera, right, it's presented a certain way and it's very palatable, but then when we discuss things off camera, they're doing some of the same things I'm doing too. So
for me, because I do have that low country folk witch flavor, we're a little darker. And cursing and hexing is just part of. It's the don't mess with me, I won't mess with you.
well, and I'd really like us to talk more too about this concept of like, getting our claws back as witches and taking our power back. I do feel like whether we want to say contemporary paganism or capitalism, making witchcraft more palatable has been something that older generations have done with good intentions, I think, in the sense of like, let's make this more palatable, let's normalize it, let's destigmatize it, that leads to further rights and also profits.
Right. Because it was really the Wiccans that were publishing the books, coming out and starting to do the gatherings, the public gatherings. And but at the same time that they were doing that, they had to tap it down.
Mhm.
They had to whitewash it. They had to make it palatable because they were in a public space.
Right. And I think that I can see, we were talking off camera as well. And like we were kind of talking about how um after our open Sabbats, we totally go out to the gay bars in our full regalia, right? Like when we have an open Sabbat and we have invited guests coming and we're wearing like our red moons on our foreheads and our cloaks
Right.
and whatever, we're going to the gay bars afterwards and we're going in our regalia. We're not washing the blood moon off of our forehead. Like we're going out in it. And that's a whole empowering thing. But my point in that is, I think because older generations of witches have done things, my generation, we've definitely reaped a lot of rewards. I can do an open public ritual, which if you follow my TikTok, you'll see that there was a video that went viral where this person was evangelizing to us. There's a whole thing
Oh,
there. But I will say that I've been hosting open Sabbats 4 times a year for the past 6 years. And it's the first time it's happened to us.
I do want to, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't want scare facts. I've been standing in spaces for over 40 years. Twice it's happened.
Yeah. So I think,
It's
not
not
only we
that
have every right.
often.
We have every right to practice our faith as long as, we're not, I guess, bothering anyone or anything, which we aren't when we're doing our ritual. Most of the time we're tucked away. Anyway, so it's not like we're doing it in the middle of a
But
parking lot, theoretically. But if we were to, so be it.
at the same time as this was happening in our community, the magic community at large, we found the folk witches, the conjure, the Appalachian grannies, our powwow, our hoodoo folks. We went deeper down. We wanted nothing to do with whitewashing. We wanted nothing to do with making it palatable. And now I see where it's taken all pendulum swing from one side to the other, where these two communities are starting to actually come together. You have to
Yeah.
understand in the 70s and the 80s that the contemporary pagan was very different than our mamas, our papas, our bokars, our hugans. Both part of the magic community, but two very different realms.
Well, I feel the same is also said.
Other.
I feel the same is also said. Like I feel like when we have shops, right, we have like more metaphysical communities and we have more occult varieties and communities. I personally feel like there are beneficial things in like both shops theoretically, and like there are some metaphysical or new age aspects of, whatever, sure, that I find cool and great, but like I definitely lean more on the occult side. And so like recently I was at this festival, which is one of the oldest like sort of psychic, witchy, metaphysical, occulty, whatever festivals, at least in the Midwest. It's called Spirit Fest. There's a lot of metaphysical, what a lot of witches like me might call like love and lighters or like light brights. Like there's a lot of them. And I feel like it's usually those sort of people who are labeling me as dark. I've been labeled as dark. I don't personally say that I'm dark.
Thank you. I was going to say, my labeling came from what I was called within the contemporary community.
Mm-hmm. And they use, and dark to me is also not really an insult. You can't insult me with saying, oh, she's dark. Because what are you really saying? Oh, she's intense. She's passionate. She's an individual taking control of her own life with her magic. She thinks for herself. Like, what are you really saying when you're saying dark?
When you say it to me, I'm thinking, oh, cool, compliment. You're saying I'm balanced, and I understand that I have to embrace both the dark and the light. I find that most folks that are labeled as dark in actuality are the ones that are seeking the light with a full understanding, a full recognition that there's dark around it. And that, like I said, when we talk that dark and light, there are things that in moments may be baneful because that's its characteristic.
Also, like
evil, like you were talking earlier, if we're going to get evil, let's just call it evil.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we're still mammals. We're still mammals. We're still part of nature. We don't look at like the weather and say, oh, that's good, that's evil, that's this, that's that. Like the weather is what the weather is. We don't look at, kind of like you were talking about, the cat, right? The cat is following its instincts. So when it kills the bird, the cat is doing what cats do. I feel like as witches, it's not really about good, evil. And
Right.
that's also so subjective to whose perspective we're looking at. Just take a look at a history book and tell me which side is good and which side is evil. Like it's far more complex than that.
And that's where, when we talk about working with lesser deities, entities, demons, people will immediately get in this evil, baneful, dark, destructive. And the reality is that's not the truth of this energy.
Right. Well, definitely think that demons in general, I think I think demonology and demonolatry are just very misunderstood
Like a
paths in the
cat.
wider community.
It's like a cat. It depends on who you're talking to, as if you think it's bad or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know,
I think that if we're going to talk about balance and if we're going to look at the concepts of like light and dark as concepts, to me, I think of one way I could associate it is like there's occultism and there's metaphysics. And I feel like that's a dichotomy as well. And
right.
something that I have found working in metaphysical stores is that oftentimes people who go and this also is true for left hand path, right hand path as well. So we could use that dichotomy as well. People who are more right hand path are metaphysics, I feel. The light, they go too far into the light. It's like they're blinded. And it's like these halos over their head literally
Out of
blind them.
balance.
Yeah.
They don't have balance.
Holy rollers, like very self-righteous. Also, like that's where a lot of cults start to form. Not a cult. I'm saying
You're
cult.
saying the C word cult.
Yeah.
We're talking the bad word, folks, the ones where you got to listen to whoever special guru.
Yeah, look at a lot of these gurus that are hosting workshops, for $12,000. You can go out to Hawaii and have a whole experience and become awakened. And they just keep pulling at your coin purse and your bag. I mean,
Society has left so much of folks that empty something inside. And to satisfy that something, ultimately, we have to embrace that there's dark and light, good and bad. There's balance in everything, and that we are connected. I think a lot of this white light stuff comes from how I perceive it. This is one witch's opinion. I see it as a form of isolation where they've taken it all upon themselves. They've almost taken on a martyr status.
mm-hmm.
And that they are going to be the soul healer. And I see it so as out of balance. We need death and destruction for there to be growth and rebirth. We need 4 seasons. That's what Mother Nature teaches us, shows us, does every year for how many 100,000 million years now. All right. We need day and night. And I see a lot of these are very much out of balance.
Sure. I see also they're also like going super far more LHP or more into like dark, whatever.
Either way, it swings.
I can't say as much about more of the metaphysics or like the light, whatever, even though I don't like using that dichotomy. I'm definitely more left.
What phraseology? We're left with the words that society gives us to describe ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I spoke earlier, whereas by default at times, when people I'm in a, especially contemporary pagan community, I'll be like, I'm a dark witch.
Yeah.
Not because that's really a correct phraseology, but that is the term that I know these folks will understand.
Sure.
That no, I'm not part of contemporary paganism. If you want to assume I'm part of the left-hand path, I'm fine with that. That's easy enough for me to deal with. I would rather have that than you assume I'm part of contemporary pagan, because I'm going to really confuse you.
Sure.
So how do we get new words to describe balance, acceptance?
Well, I think going back to like what we define dark as, because to me, I'm kind of thinking like if people are assuming that black or dark equates evil, then why don't we just call it offensive magic? And why don't we just call it malefica? Like, why don't we just call it that? I don't know if I think that the mainstream world is associating black magic with balance. I think
No,
they're associating black magic with evil, wrongdoing. So let's just call it malefica, or let's just call it offensive magic, or let's call it baneful working, as opposed to that, you know?
I love that. I think we should, and I hope all of you viewers really start thinking about the words you're using.
Yeah.
You
Like,
know,
why do we call things what we call them, you know?
just because you read in a book that it's baneful, it's like a lot of times I get questions on the goddess Hecate. Because I do videos periodically about her. Like I said earlier, I have a relationship with her, but I do not consider myself a devotee, and that I'm allowed. You don't have to be a devotee. It's like you said, there are folks that are like, I like Jesus, but I'm really not all into that Christianity stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that.
Right.
But a lot of times people reach out with, I'm afraid to work with Hecate because I read she's a dark goddess. And I'm thinking, stop reading books, start feeling it. Because
Something I feel about the dark goddess, and actually we just had a workshop on like the dark goddess archetype at the shop recently, and something from kind of my gnosis that I feel about working with the goddess current as a whole is,
right.
we've had this trope of like the MMC for a little while now, maiden mother crone. Like we've had this sort of trope. And these cycles also line up with 3 lunar cycles, of course, of like waxing, full, waning. A lot of us maybe are already familiar with that, but there's a cycle of the moon that's not talked about as well, being like the dark moon, which is kind of the opposition to the full moon. And so I feel like the dark moon is synonymous to me with dark mother, which is kind of a reversed undercurrent of the full moon. And so it goes like, if I were to work it into like an MMC dichotomy, which I'm personally not that way so much, but if I were to work it into like a more contemporary MMC sort of aspect, it would go from death and dark mother to then waxing maiden to then full mother to then dying crone to then death dark mother, and like work it in like that.
Ooh,
Dark
I
is
like that.
night. I feel like dark is more unseen. Dark is more night. And
I was like, within, for us, I know within the House of Witchcraft, we typically don't work within new moon energy. We work within dark moons. We work a full moon.
dark mother undercurrents.
Right. We work a full moon. We work a dark moon.
Yeah.
Periodically, if somebody's doing something that requires a new moon, we will do it. But the new moon itself is a modern energy that contemporary pagans have introduced to us. We find that when we look to history, we're looking to full moons and dark moons.
Mm-hmm.
Those are our liminal spaces, our energetic shifts. And that's what we're leaning into. Like you said, I know within contemporary pagan, it's like new moon, new, and you're like, hey, that's great. You do that. And if you're, and honestly, I say that off the cuff, but in reality, if you're vibing on the energy, use it, but use it understanding that there are other points of energy out there.
Yeah.
And that dark moon doesn't, because I would like in the 80s, I know, and well into the 90s, any contemporary pagan book would say dark moons are bad, do nothing. But if we look to folk traditions, we see that dark moons are our time to do things. And typically what happens, dark moons are times for sacrifices. And so for a lot of that commercialization, we can't talk about that. So we're just
Right.
going to have new moons.
Right.
We're not going to talk about that dark moon stuff. We're going to do new moon where it's happy.
Yeah. Something that like I had an interesting conversation about was like someone was like, well, are you going to do a light goddess workshop? And like, no, absolutely not. And the reason for that is because like when I'm saying dark goddess, I'm talking about the dark moon. So like there isn't a counter there, light goddess to me doesn't fit within my archetypal narrative because when I'm
Right.
saying dark goddess, I'm looking at this from a lunar perspective. We're looking at waxing, full,
Right.
waning. That's what some people choose to work with. I'm talking about working with as a priest, priestess, priestess of the dark moon current, like a cosmic, celestial, void like energy.
I was like, can I say, I'll say it out loud. We can thank Scott Cunningham for writing down a list of these are good, these are bad.
Mm-hmm.
And he started that classification, very hard classification of good, bad, and which we saw go all the way now, even to many of the books we see published on dark goddesses.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, I get upset because my attitude is there's no such thing as a dark goddess. There is a goddess of transformation. And it got labeled as dark. It got
Mm-hmm.
labeled as bad. It got labeled as evil. But the reality is that when we look at what is labeled by contemporary as dark are really labels of change, transformation, growth.
Also, women's sexuality, a lot of like
Oh,
spirits associated with liberation of women or women's sexuality have been labeled as dark as well. A lot of goddesses that are associated with prophecy, divination, war, death, witchcraft are thought of as dark.
and
Um,
they're not. Their stories are beautiful. They're uplifting. They're full of compassion, kindness. They're full of gnosis, knowledge within ourselves. There ain't nothing dark about it. To embrace a lot of these energies is to have the courage to walk through the door. That's it. But for many folks, that's enough to stop them. And they
yeah.
stand on the other side of the door talking about, oh, you can't cross over there. It's dark. It's evil. And they're right.
Which, like, I think some of that goes into like making witchcraft more palpable because the witchcraft that I practice and the witch that I am calls me to step out of my comfort zone and calls me sometimes to experience fear in its most raw and primal form as a powerful ritual tool. Like meeting the witch's devil is not a fun, cuddly, uh, shit rainbows, shove a rose quartz up your ass sort of experience. That's not how the witch's devil is for me.
Right.
It's primal, it's ecstatic, it's ecstasy, it's fear, all kind of wrapped up in this package, you know? And there's power in that. And yeah, as far as the goddess bit,
There's
like,
something I love your phraseology because I flip it in my for us, it's the dark man at the crossroads. Having the strength to stand within that space and claim it as your own,
yeah,
being able to walk through those crossroads, knowing where you're going and not getting distracted, not getting, laid astray because you know your voice.
yeah.
And the dark man's there to tempt us and at the same time strengthen us. You know, and you have to have that moment, like you said, that moment of fear. I know that I too, when I've opened up the crossroads, I've had like that, oh shit, what have you done, Taren moment.
And if you don't want to experience like growth, rebirth, these are painful things. Like you can ask a lot of people who have had children, you know, that sort of birth maybe wasn't necessarily like the most pleasant, fun, enjoyable, pleasurable experience. Like sometimes birth is screaming and pain and
It
agonizing,
is.
right? So the craft to me pushes us through that growth as well. And like there are going to be moments that are going to be like that. And there's power in that and there's sacredness in that.
A lot of folks think somehow that transformation is going to be easy and effortless. I love the childbirth comparison because I'm like,
I would love to see where in nature metamorphosis or transformation for any creature is simple or easy
right.
or painless.
And realizing that when you embrace a magical journey, you are embracing these transformations, and they're going to be messy, they're going to hurt, they're going to upend your personal paradigm. What you are believing is going to get shifted, and leaning into it, and leaning into those moments of uncertainty instead of running away from them, you're leaning in. I would talk witchcraft is at its finest an oral tradition. How we learn is being in a state of wonderment. A state of wonderment is where we're leaning in with the, I wonder what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and I think like I think it's okay, maybe, especially given people's personal individual backgrounds, because, there's trauma and things like that that shape how we're experiencing this. But if you're afraid to like actually have your claws and like your sharp teeth and your wings, if you're afraid of that, then like maybe don't. Maybe don't.
Yeah, it's like you're just not ready yet.
Yeah.
One of my things here around my group where I will say to folks, don't make me spread my demon wings.
And personally, I'm interested
Where
myself in my own spirituality. And with other people, it's like, okay, let's get our claws back and our sharp teeth back and let's re-feral the witch. I feel like witches, the current that I feel so called to is like the feralness of the craft, the wildness of the craft. I want to
I
be with
love
that
that.
current. I want to be with that.
I think that for many of our new folks coming into the community, they need to learn to set boundaries and say no.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, be quiet. Like, if you want to get your claws back, if you want your fangs back, you need to know your personal boundaries and where you draw the line and say no.
And when that line is crossed, act
And
accordingly.
but you know the line, you don't need to justify it. You don't need to qualify it. You don't need to do some long ass explanation. No is no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to tell you my story. I just have to say no.
Yes.
And when we are able to bring that power up, that is back to the claws and the fangs, where you start to understand you cross my no, you cross my line, that's where my demon wings are going to come out. No means no. And
Period.
yeah, and I ain't got to explain. And that's, I think, a lot of young, which really we're all supposed to get along and kumbaya together. But at the same time, we have to come as individuals. We need to know who we are and our personal code of ethics, our personal moral compass. And when we have those things, we set lines that say no means no. And if you cross that line, you are damn right. I am going to pull out everything I have. My attitude is I'm going to stomp you down 3 times as hard so you never mess with me again.
Yeah, that's a rhetoric that I've heard as well too. Like when people talk about like the rule of three and saying that like, witches live by the rule of three in the sense that, you do me good, I'll do you better. You do me bad, I'll do you worse.
Absolutely. And I think that is the best rule to live by. It's one I've lived by for years and it's served me well. This community has been the most amazing, full of blessings. But the blessings have occurred when I know my boundaries. The blessings occurred when I spoke my authentic voice. And when I was able to brush aside the bullshit, the role-playing people, the foam, the commercialization, and start getting into the truth, the gnosis of what spiritual enlightenment, of what magical energy is, occurred all within, not because of something I read, not because of something somebody said, but it happened in here.
Which in here is also the dark too, because it's internal. It's our internal selves. It's our dark inner world. So like vilifying the dark is also vilifying ourselves. So that's what I meant by doing a disservice to ourselves, to communities, and to magic as a whole.
Yes. I'm just sitting here. Yes. And I think that we need to have more conversations like this where really looking at these lists of dark, light, good, bad, baneful, beneficial. One of my favorite stories to tell is the story of the dandelion. Everybody says, oh, it's a weed. I'm like, it's one of the most beneficial plants on the planet. Not only can you eat it, it's also got medicinal purposes and it's got some great spiritual, magical qualities. And it grows anywhere. It's very hard to kill. It's resilient. But yet society says it's a weed. Spray pesticides on it and kill it because it's bad. And to really flip that script and look at it, don't just listen to what folks are telling you. I love all my dandelions in my yard. That's what you actually can't see it. There she is.
Oh.
I love the dandelion because it reminds me that things that are called weeds, things that are called dark, things that are, somehow they've been othered, are anything but that. And that they still survive. And as much as you try to stomp it out, spray all your shit, it can grow between the cracks of concrete. And that's how I want to be. I want that type of stick to it.
Absolutely.
And so I am going to wind this down because I know that Jasmine and I could talk forever. And we will definitely get back together and continue on some more conversations. I want to say thank you so much, Jasmine. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
For being here. And I'm going to make you suffer for a half a second as I do my shameless promotion. Remember, I am an author. I am both traditionally and independently published. I have Hoodoo in the Psalms, where I've gone through all 150 of the Psalms, and I divinified their active magical verses. And of course, my newest book out is Magical Herbal Teas and Incense Recipes, because we know the nose is attached to the mouth. Think of this as a pairing of wines. And of course, for Bag Your Mojo, if you're looking for a straight no-nonsense guide on making a mojo bag, I've got 14 recipes that cover everything you need, including getting you a little something, something. And then I'm going to go to A Witch's Guide to the Season of the Dead. This is the time of the year. Please reach out, and I will finish up with Crossroads Witchcraft. And please remember, in 2023, I have Conjuring Dirt coming out. And with that said, witches, I have just blurred a mouthful up. I'm so sorry, but I need to do my publicity for the book. I want to thank all y'all witches out there for leaning in, for all of you who hit the subscribe button, the like, notify. I so appreciate. And with that said, get out there, fly those brooms, have a bright, blessed day. And as always, amen, blessed be, ashe, and H.o.W.